Education opens doors for the gospel, bringing hope to dark places and sparking lasting change around the world. At Teach Beyond, we're reaching the nations through education.
This is Transformed and Transformational, a podcast from Teach Beyond. I'm Kian.
And I'm Heather. We're exploring how the gospel transforms us and overflows to impact classrooms, communities, and the world.
Let's jump into today's conversation.
Today, we are introducing a new segment for the months when there is a fifth Friday, and we're calling this A Calling Story from History.
Education as missions isn't a new thing or something that Teach Beyond came up with. There are many missionaries serving today in the field of education, and there have been many throughout the centuries.
Today, we're rewinding back to the late 1800s and the turn of the century to hear the story of Charlotte Digges Moon, better known as Lottie Moon. Of course, we can't interview Lottie herself, but today we're joined by Amy Whitfield, who recently authored a children's book about Lottie.
Amy Whitfield is a communications leader who has served in key roles with the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and Southeastern Seminary, as well as co-hosted a podcast for the Southern Baptist Convention. She now focuses on helping tell stories that shape the church through her role in a local church, as well as through external consulting. Amy and her family currently live in North Carolina in the United States.
Let's go over to our first calling story from history about Lottie Moon. Welcome to the podcast, Amy.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Hi, Amy. We are excited to have you. As we get started, could you tell us a little bit about your story, about your connection to mission, and how has missions been a part of your story?
Sure. Yeah. So, for a long time, my family, we've been very invested in the local church. So my husband is a pastor, went into the pastorate about 20 years ago. And then he was a professor at Southeastern Seminary. And I was part of the staff there. And one of the things I did there was I was director of communications for several years. And, that is a space that is very focused on missions, not just sending people, but actually developing students to serve the church and fulfill the Great Commission, and to kind of go out and turn the hearts of people towards what's happening around the world, and to really focus on the Great Commission. So, we went there prepared for him to equip people in the classroom. And then I got the chance to just tell all these stories of people going out. And so it was kind of just a great experience to really hold the rope and to put forth for people why we should all have a passion for the Great Commission, and for sending, whether you are someone who is back here, who is praying, whether you are giving, whether you are going yourself. And so, we've gotten to do that through short-term trips. We've loved taking our kids around the world and showing them what missionaries are doing on the field. We've always been open to, if the Lord were to send us overseas, we would go. But for now, he's called us to point people here. And then even in our church here, where my husband pastors, we do the same, pointing people to the other side of the world.
Well, you talked about sharing stories of what God was doing at the university and through the students. Now we're looking today back in the past and looking at the story of a missionary from the past. So I'd love to hear from you. What do you see as the importance of knowing the stories of missionaries in the past? And then today we're focused specifically on Lottie Moon. So why Lottie Moon specifically too?
Yeah. So, this in some ways is a convergence of two really great loves. I mean, there's a passion for international missions and for pointing people to the nations. But I also really at heart, I'm a historian. So that's what I love more than anything is church history. And I think it's imperative for us to know the stories of the past, particularly those who have gone on before us in the church, just to get the context, the history that we have come from, and then also just the inspiration that comes. So that's a really special thing that's happening when you are learning about missionaries, because it matters to know the story of how the gospel has spread to places around the world, but it's also really good to be able to look at these legacies, to hear the hardships that they had, to know and understand kind of the footsteps that we are walking in. And her story in particular kind of applies to everyone who is in this spot, whether it is someone who is going or is holding the rope. And so I think Lottie's story is really special to tell.
As you were looking at her story, studying her story, preparing to share her story with others, what are some of the big highlights, the big moments in her life that you like to share that are key moments in her life?
Yeah. So, one of the things that's really special about her, and why it is really great to tell her story is, she's kind of the total package. She is this woman who had, sort of this incredible testimony how the Lord drew her to Himself. It's in the book just a little bit, but she was trying to sleep one night, and there was a dog that was barking, and couldn't go to sleep. It kept her up, and so she thought, well, if I can't sleep, I might as well just think about God. She had been hearing this. She had been hearing the gospel preached, but had not done anything to her. It had she had not believed, and so she decided to go to church, and she did, and she heard the word preached, and she became a believer. And so she has this incredible testimony, and gets pulled to go overseas. So you see in her this story of someone who says, I'm called to go, and you get to kind of take in this thing she did as a single woman back at a time when you're not getting on a plane, you're getting on a steamer boat. She's traveling by train across the country, and then getting on a boat. It takes several weeks to get there. So you see the incredible sacrifices. You hear her story there, but then she had this incredible gift of communication. She wrote so many letters. She wrote these letters back to the leaders at what was the Foreign Mission Board at the time, to tell them what was needed. She wrote to churches. She wrote letters that were kind of intended to be distributed among all the churches, public letters. And so she knew the importance of the written word to tell people what was happening where she was. So she had this incredible communication, which is one reason, I mean, we can really follow her story because she wrote it down and sent it. And then she's coming at a time when the women's movement was sort of happening in the United States, where women were coming together in these groups to do different things, to raise money for things in their communities, to serve in certain ways in their communities. So these women's clubs were popping up everywhere, and she knew that and sort of jumped on that and said, look, if you can come together as a community and get things done, then you can come together as women and support the work over here and the needs that we have. And so there's an offering, the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, that is in her name now. That's because she had that idea that people on the ground back in the United States in the churches could come together and cooperate to support what was happening. So she has this kind of spectrum of gifts and just ways that she gave of herself, that is a story you just can't not tell. You can actually, and you can present that also, you can present that to a child and say, look at what this little girl grew up to do, and she had one idea, and now missionaries all over the world are supported because of it still.
Mhm. Mhm. I love that point that because of Lottie Moon's faithfulness and her love for the people of China, but also the letters that she wrote back to the churches, sharing about those needs, sharing what God was doing there, that others were inspired to get involved. And it's really kind of incredible that an idea that she had actually became a reality in that season. Because, you can write a letter and never hear back or
Right.
nothing ever
Right.
happens, right? But, and also that is still happening over 100 years later. Like, that's
Yes.
kind of dually crazy that it is
Right.
still
Right.
that it had such an impact.
Yep.
And so I'd love, both of you are in communications world. I'd love for you to speak to what it is about a story that can help people to feel compelled to get involved. what was it about that type of flow of telling a story and then others inspired to get involved?
I think it's interesting that the impact of letters, in the same way the Bible is made up of so many letters, and clearly like the lesson of, when you share your story, it can move others, it can move communities. It doesn't have to be written to one person. It can instead be
Mm,
written to a group of people, and engaging in those together, engaging in reading a letter together and hearing stories together,
mhm,
can shape how people think about the other side of the world, how people think about China or where she's serving and what their
mhm.
role in that is. They can feel
And
far
having a
away from
realistic
it.
picture of it, right? Like,
Having a realistic
knowing actually what it
picture
looks like.
and
Right.
a personal invitation to like get engaged is really powerful.
Right. And I think, because she wrote so many letters, people felt like they knew her. And I think that's really important too. But yeah, telling, missionary stories, or even now reading missionary biographies or missionary journals, it just helps people to see, to understand the need, but then also to see how the Holy Spirit is working in these places. And when it comes to stories like Lottie's from a long time ago, what's pretty incredible is we stand in a place where we also know things about the church in China. We know things about how this offering has impacted um, missionaries and mission efforts all over the world. And so now that makes the story even more important, because we're looking at results that she didn't even get to see.
As you wrote this book, it's a children's book, so it's written for a
Right.
very specific audience. How did you kind of filter through what she did in her life and figure out what goes in a children's book? And are there pieces that you had to leave out because it was like this wouldn't
Right.
make sense in a children's book, but adults should learn about this kind of thing
that
they might have
that
missed?
was that was very difficult. It was really intimidating. So I have never written a children's book before. I never thought about writing a children's book. I got the chance to do this project because of my love for history and my love for her. And so what I was taking was sort of my ability to tell a story about someone in history, and then translating it over to kids. So I had primarily done essays, or those types of things, book chapters, and so when they told me you need to distill her entire story into 750 words, I thought, I don't have any idea how to do that. I did learn some things about the process of writing a children's book that was just really things you don't think about when it's not your typical MO. So things like, you're working with an illustrator, and so the pictures can tell the story just along with the words. So that helps you kind of pull some things out, because you say, hey, let's put this in the picture, and then I don't have to explain it. So I get some words back. Um, but it was really hard because, one of the hardest things was not being able to tell a lot of stories about her time in China. When you go to some of the biographies that are out there, I mean, there's just tons. There's things about what the other missionaries were doing. There's about her and her sister and what it was like when she got there. You can't go into any of that. Some of these stories about people that she shared the gospel with and that confessed Christ, you can't get into that. You can only give this kind of 10,000 foot view. And so it was pretty intimidating. Something that's very interesting about Lottie's story is there's only been a few comprehensive biographies written about her through the years, but her story is told in so many ways. It's told in articles, it's told in web form, it's blog posts, it's told in marketing materials for the Christmas offering. There was a play that was done about her years and years ago. There was a great essay in a book by a historian, Elizabeth Flowers, who she talked about how Lottie's story had been used throughout the years to basically communicate particular messages. Like if it was trying to draw people to give to the offering, or if it was trying to demonstrate a particular example of something. And so she could find instances of people kind of picking and choosing certain parts of her story, but didn't really tell the whole thing. So I had found that essay very interesting when I had read it years ago. So when I had the responsibility to tell her story, I was so just intimidated with the burden of that. Like, I don't want to do the same thing. I want to do this in a way that, yes, I don't have a lot of words. Yes, I'm doing this for kids, but I want to do so in a way that honors her as a whole person. So that's been, my prayer that the book did accomplish that. But it makes it hard when you get somebody that's talked about so much. It's easy to cherry pick things, but when someone's alive as long as she was, they have a whole life. So there were so many stories that I wish I could have brought into it, but hopefully it kind of opened the door for kids to be interested in her and in what she did.
Well, one thing that is mentioned in the book is that Lottie Moon's profession was that she was a
Right.
teacher. And
Right.
so I'd love to hear more about what you see as the significance of education in missions and in her story as well.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a huge part of her story, not just that she was a teacher, but that she was such an educated woman herself. I mean, she really was. At the time that she completed her schooling, she probably was may have been the most highly educated woman in the Southeast. And she, spoke all these languages. She had, I think, she had a master's degree. Um, she was brilliant. And so the first thing that she does, is she runs a girls' school. And first of all, I think it's really important when you look at the time that she was growing up and then that she was teaching. That's a time when education for young women is not, what was not what it eventually became. And so she's kind of a pioneer in that. But I really think that, her education personally, and then her commitment to education is really what made her, first of all, made her attuned to the needs of the people in China. She focused a lot on making sure that there were teachers there when there were, people that she couldn't get to, knowing we need teachers here. That was really important to her. But it also is what made her as articulate as she was and able to do all the things that she did, able to communicate. So, I mean, I think that's an incredibly important thing. And then I also think that educating about missions, I mean, this is what gave her the picture. At the time, she wasn't sure if she would be able to go. Single women, there weren't a lot of single women who were on the field. They were sending, husbands and wives. Her sister was there, and there had been a few more, but her hearing and saying, "I want to get there," that only comes from knowing the call of God on the hearts of people to go and make disciples. And so I think it's incredibly important. And I think it's important in our churches that we are educating our kids about the Bible, that we are educating them about the doctrines of the faith, and that we are educating them about that call to go and make disciples.
Yeah. And even as she went, that it was via education at
Right,
first that she was building connections and, like you said,
right.
serving the girls, that became a bridge to then be able to share
That's
the
right.
gospel. And so yeah, it seems like using her gifts to motivate other people to participate, her
Hmm.
gifts to train the next generation in that location, even
Right.
cultural gifts. It's kind of incredible that she was able to settle into that new culture. I think today about how much cross cultural pre field training we want people to,
Right.
feel equipped to go and to travel to such an extent of train and boat and arrive in a new place you haven't been before.
Hmm.
Today we can
Yeah.
take vision trips, we can do short-term trips first, all of that. It's kind of incredible how she kind of used the gifts that she had developed in her home country as a way to enter into that new culture.
Yes. 100%.
Let's take a short break to hear a story from the field.
I'm Jack Waffler. I teach beyond missionary serving here in Chiang Rai, Thailand. Chiang Rai International Christian School serves the community here in northern Thailand so that Christ's name might be glorified. It's an honor to me to get to serve especially these third culture kids, but also the families of local Thai people. Getting to serve TCKs is a pleasure for me, especially because I also grew up as a third culture kid. I heard so often the name Lottie Moon, and her legacy lives on in our support team today. As our ministry partners give generously of their lives and of their finances, praying for us, walking alongside us in ministry, I think of this Lottie Moon legacy. I had the benefit of receiving basically everything that I had as a Southern Baptist missionary kid through the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. I'm thankful for her legacy, giving not only of what she had in physical resources, but also of her life. We wonder how much of this legacy she was aware of. Probably not much of it. That's not the point, is it? I'm thankful for God's call for obedience, for your obedience as you follow the Great Commission, and the spirit of what Lottie Moon gave her life for. Thank you for being generous. Thank you for giving and being a part of what God is doing across the world and across time.
For our weekly spotlight, we are focusing on serving in a creative access context. Although in a number of countries it's not possible to serve as a traditional missionary, many times there's a door of opportunity open to educators, like there was for Lottie. If you want to learn more about opportunities to serve with Teach Beyond, visit the opportunity board at teachbeyond.org/go.
And now, back to our conversation with Amy. As a historian, someone who loves history, reading stories, looking back, I'm curious, as you study missionaries, I think there's the current view of like looking back and being in awe of them as like otherworldly, kind of like holy people who we can't relate to, versus maybe some truth about like the difficulties they went through. So what are some myths and misunderstandings as you look back and you're like, oh, that's interesting, or like, I bet you people don't think about it that way. Even learning
Yeah,
that Lottie went to do education is news, kind of news
right,
to me, and it's so interesting to
right.
learn these things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the misunderstandings that people have, as you just said, is that there's sort of a special, special kind of person that is turned towards missions. When the reality is, we're all called to this in some way. Yes, the Lord does call people specifically to go internationally. That is something that that we know, but it's almost like, well, they're missionaries that I'm not, and just not a lot of times I think people don't understand the role that we all play in the Great Commission, even in sending. And then, like you said, I think people don't really understand the hardships, because the challenges are really tough. And I do think it's important. I think it's, first of all, really important reading these from missionaries who have gone on before us to see the hardships they faced. But it's actually good and important to know what missionaries today are dealing with. That's where telling their stories becomes really important, or going and supporting, so that we know how to pray and how to provide, and that we maybe even know the needs that should be filled for more to go, because it is not easy. It's something that people are called to. They've had to leave their families. A lot of them have kids who are not getting the opportunity to just be with their grandparents all the time and things. They're in a different place. They're making a home in a place that is not, where they grew up. And then they face spiritual warfare. They face challenges. They face persecution in a lot of places. And then, sometimes they just face long periods of time with no real
Mm-hmm.
what they experience as movement.
Mm-hmm.
And when you read some of these stories,
Loneliness,
that's right,
disconnectedness. Yeah.
loneliness,
Yeah.
all of that. Sometimes when you read these stories of missionaries that have gone on before, you learn from their journals that that's really what they felt for months and months and months at a time. And some of them didn't really even see until the end of their life, or maybe not
Mm-hmm.
ever, the impact of what they did. So part of it is just perseverance,
Mm.
where they are. So I think that's, it's almost like missionaries are a special class, and I can't enter into that, and I don't really understand it. I think that is something that we have to break down, really, by talking about it all the time.
What does that look like for your family? Like, what does that look like practically for your family to talk about that, to make it more part of the conversation?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing is, as I mentioned, we our kids really grew up in a setting where they were part of a seminary family that was talking about it a lot.
Sure.
It was a really high value there, so they were exposed to it a lot. Um, and then it was encouraged, when you went on short-term mission trips, if you could take your family, to do that. So we took them on 2 trips with us. We went to Southeast Asia, and we went to Japan, and they went with us, and they were kind of at different ages. They were older elementary when we went to Southeast Asia, and then they were in like middle school and high school when we went to Japan. And it was an opportunity for them to really to meet the missionaries on the ground, to see what they were doing. In one of those trips, the missionaries had kids their age, and so they got to see what's it like to be, a kid here, and they're playing with kids in the neighborhood and things. So then when we talked about it, when we talked about missions, they actually knew and could picture. Now that's not everybody is able to do that. We were able to do that because of where we were and the number of trips that were happening. But there are ways, whether it is through local mission trips, whether it's through meeting missionaries, or even, there are ways, if churches have care teams, and you can have Zoom calls with missionaries, things like that, so that you expose your kids to the stories. And so I think, they were sort of immersed in it. We also, have been parts of churches that really focused on missions. I think that's important, that it's not just this thing over here, but it kind of is woven into the preaching and teaching. So they just were around it a lot. And then our daughter ended up, she went to the college there at Southeastern. I think it's Judson College now, and has studied theology, and so she feels a pull towards ministry. And then our son, who is at universities at East Carolina University, he has had this kind of exposure that he's able to take. And then when we go on mission trips, still, we just went on one this summer, my husband and I, we're telling them stories they understand when we're coming back and sharing it with them. They understand what we were doing and why.
I think about what you started all that with is, it was just being talked about in the home. And there's a simplicity to that if nothing else, reading this book with your kids, or
Right.
having conversations about why, like, what is the Great Commission, and that would just kind of be part of the conversation, is such a good first step, that anyone can do. And I love that this particular resource can be a starting point for that,
Yes.
to make that a normal part of the conversation, and then perhaps see where that leads. Some other great suggestions you've given. Well, Amy, you close the book with talking about how Lottie was much like any other girl. And you write
Right.
this: God woke her up to know him, and she didn't rest until she told the world his story. Through the simple acts of baking cookies and writing letters and quite a bit of feisty determination, Lottie's dream of reaching the world for Jesus came true. And I love that you point out how normal she was. We've talked about that today, that, it's
Right.
not that she was on a pedestal, even though we might look at it that way
Right.
today. But it was God at work in her to use her powerfully. And that, missions can look as practical as writing letters, baking cookies, teaching. And so I imagine this as an inspiration then for others to see, okay, what is it that I can do? I don't really like writing letters, or I'm not a teacher. I don't really like baking cookies. Okay, that's what Lottie was good at and
Right.
enjoyed. But what does that look like for you to, be reflecting on? And so